Alright, this is going to be something pretty quick and on the c3 Sicilian. I'm not going to do what most other people do here, and they go, oh, well, attacking the pawn, pushing the pawn. I mean, every move is physically doing something. I don't think it's relevant. I think I'll just say very brief things about different pawn structures that may arise. So anyways, e4, c5, let's see here, c3, knight f6. Of course, there are many other possibilities. You can play, for example, d6, d4, knight f6, bishop d3, and there are various different setups by playing g6, bishop g7. It's just a somewhat rare sideline. And you can also play d5 also. Anyways, I'm not going to mention all of the various possibilities. Knight f6, e5, knight d5. Okay, Tiviakov is one of the main players who plays the c3 Sicilian with white now, and he usually plays knight f3. Knight c6 is the line I'm suggesting, which is one of the main lines. Bishop c4, knight b6, bishop b3, and now the main line is actually with c4, bishop c2, queen c7. And anyways, the point of those moves is to semi-isolate the e5 pawn, so that black can simplify the pawn tension in the center. And in the majority of those positions, black should be equalizing. For example, in most of Tiviakov's games, black is a pretty equal position, and but usually Tiviakov just outplays people. So anyways, but there's a slightly more dynamic way that you can also play this position by playing g6. And now, for example, d4 looks pretty natural. I'm not sure what other suggestions I can have here besides, say, something like knight g5. But anyways, d4, take. Now if knight g5, you can just play d5. And if they take en passant, you play e6, and then later recapture the d6 pawn. And this sort of structure, resulting structure, usually offers no problems for black. But anyways, obviously it would be incorrect in this sort of position to play e6 and now take, because now you just have tons of dark square weaknesses. But, and for example, I'll go back. Okay, so I won't really comment on this much more, but I'll just say that in this resulting structure after d6, it seems like white actually has quite a lot of trouble maintaining the pawn center. I think he should almost definitely take on d6 and just play with an isolated pawn. Yeah, he probably the best is knight b5. But when I look at this sort of position, I think to myself that it generally looks like a worse version of a lot of other isolated pawn positions that usually offer few problems for black. So anyways, I would be happy to play this sort of position with black, and you get easy piece play with bishop f5 or bishop g4. And anyways, I'll go back to one of the other lines. So let's take, for example, d4. Okay, d4. Okay, queen takes d4 is one line. I won't go too much into it, but for example, e6, bishop d3 was a line recently played. Knight c6, queen e4, and let's say d6. And actually, when you look at this in the computer, a lot of computers seem to enjoy playing these sorts of positions with black. For example, in this sort of structure, once black plays f5 eventually, and then castles, it's a pretty dynamic pawn structure because at any moment he can play e5. For example, knight f3, f5, and castle, castle. And now, for example, you could play h6, so that, for example, if you played e5, bishop c4, you wouldn't have to deal with something like this, and knight g5. So anyways, h6 looks like a useful move, and the position should be possibly even better for black. that's just one of the many lines. Anyways, c takes d4 is what I'm viewing as one of the main lines. Knight e6, knight f3, and b6 is a main line, and also d6. I usually play d6. So anyways, d6, and white has many developmental possibilities, but most of them involve just placing the bishop somewhere. Whether he's going to put the bishop on d3 or the bishop on c4 is somewhat a matter of taste. But overall, I think that black is usually equalizing in almost every line without too much difficulty. For example, I saw one game with the a3 bishop d3 plan, where black actually just got a better position right from the opening. Let's see, it was a3, and in this line, black played bishop d7. Bishop d7 with the idea of going to c6. And in most other lines, you don't have the time to just play bishop d7, bishop c6, knight d7, but it's a pretty comfortable setup. So because a3 is such a slow move, we get the time to be able to do something like this. So I saw a game with bishop d3, bishop c6, castle, knight d7, and there's already quite good pressure on the center, and the bishop is well placed on c6. So I saw a game with b4 and just a6, and it's already somewhat awkward to develop the pieces. For example, obviously knight c3 is impossible, but knight bd2 was the move played in the game, and then just knight f4.